Hey everyone, welcome again to More Layers. I'm Seth Mariano.
And I'm Jordan Smith, and our topic today actually kind of sort of connects to our last week's episode because we started making comparisons between the two. And it has to do with a popular franchise that has existed since the 90s, has a lot of comedy, has a lot of important lessons, and so much more. And it's not SpongeBob. It is actually VeggieTales. Some people may be wondering, why are grown men talking about VeggieTales? But keep in mind, grown men created VeggieTales. And it's never too early or too late to learn important lessons.
Yeah, so VeggieTales basically is a computer animated home video franchise that started back, I believe, 1993. And it was designed basically to be a sort of evangelical tool to kids. And it stars a cast of computer animated anthropomorphic, or however you say it, fruit and vegetable characters. Let's see, doing like sketches, musical segments, and trying to communicate biblical messages primarily. And it was pretty interesting. It came at a time when computer animation was just still kind of struggling to find its groove, more or less. And it was a couple years before Toy Story came out, and of course how that movie revolutionized the film world. And it was overall a successful series. The creator Phil Vischer even described it as the most successful direct-to-video animated series or direct-to-video series of all time. And it's reportedly been in a third of households with young kids. So it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I've known people who weren't necessarily Christian who still grew up with the franchise.
Yeah.
From what I understand, based on research that I made, apparently when Phil Vischer was still creating this, and you would probably know because you're more versed in the history and origins of the series than I am. Before it was a tomato and a cucumber, Phil Vischer was thinking of making the main character or characters like a bar of chocolate, and then his wife came in and said, yeah, maybe not do that.
Yeah, well, the story goes, and Phil Vischer details this in his memoir, Me, Myself, and Bob, which I have a copy of, and it's interesting. It talks a lot about, Vischer's early life and the origin story of VeggieTales and some behind-the-scenes trivia. If you're a fan of the series or a fan of animation in general, I think you might like the book. He does talk about how when he was, kind of starting the series or starting to think about making a half-hour animated video series, he was looking for some sort of geometric shape that would go well with like the face he designed on the computer or something, and figured a chocolate bar is the right geometric shape. So he's kind of playing around with that, and then his wife came in and said, if you make kids fall in love with candy bars, moms are going to be mad about it.
Yeah, that definitely. I can definitely get behind. Excuse me. I can definitely get behind her reasoning. There we go.
Yeah.
And making it fruits and vegetables. Honestly, I think it was a good move. Maybe it's just because it's what I grew up with, but it was called VeggieTales, and that rolls off the tongue. What would he have called it if it was a chocolate bar?
Right. Probably Candy Tales or something.
Maybe, but again, maybe it's just because I'm used to the one thing, but it doesn't roll off the tongue as well. And I remember seeing on YouTube somewhere, like the original test footage that they made, one of the first animations they ever did was Larry popping up out of a bowl and then hopping towards the camera. And then there was at least one other one where Bob was kind of pitching the idea of what VeggieTales would be. And for the time, the animation was impressive because, like you were saying, like computer-generated animations like that were very obscure at the time. Like most CG anything at that point was being used for like giant monsters or complicated gadgets in movies or something like that. But like you said, as well, even before Toy Story they started doing this, and it only got better over time.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. The time it came out, computer animation was, I think, pretty much struggling to find its groove. And before developing the series, Phil Vischer had been working in video production, like developing animations, graphics for things like advertising, educational videos, or stuff like that. And yeah, and so yeah, it was maybe in a way ahead of its time, more or less.
It was definitely ahead of its time, and even if it wasn't the first to do that sort of thing, it was definitely pretty close to being one of the first to make an all computer generated animation show. And you said it started in '93?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, so that does sound right, because I remember at one point looking at the timeline of when all of them were released. And I think they started not too long before my time.
Yeah.
So it probably was around the '93, '94 era. And I don't remember what the first one I ever saw was, but I know the first one that they made, if I recall correctly, was Where's God When I'm Scared?
Yeah. Right. Or as it's titled, literally, Where's God When I'm Scared? But it's a little trickier to say, though.
I mean, the way it's written gets the point across, because people will like stretch out what they're saying if they're nervous, because they can't process what they're saying in the moment while they're feeling all this fear.
Right.
And it was that episode, along with a good handful of some of the earlier episodes, where I discovered as a really young kid that I myself was a little scared whenever I saw a VeggieTales character with a very angry face. Like it, for example, there's a scene in the beginning of that one where Junior's walking up the stairs, looks at a family portrait, and then they all just suddenly start frowning at him, to which he runs up the stairs even faster. It's like, yeah, if I saw that happen, I would have reacted the same way.
Oh, yeah. So this is the first segment titled Tales from the Crisper. Little title reference to Tales from the Crypt. And basically the plot is a young lead character in the series, Junior Asparagus, has just been watching this it's basically a VeggieTales universe equivalent of Frankenstein. Frankencelery, they call it.
Yeah.
And kind of getting a little, not outwardly, but inside freaked out about it. And, well, but pretty much denying that it scares him. And he's kind of heading up toward his room, and then he sees like the family in that picture come to life, and that freaks him out, and he just kind of rushes for the door and shuts it quickly.
And then eventually he's visited by Bob and Larry. They sing that honestly really catchy song. And once that's all done, he realizes he doesn't need to be scared, because God's always there and he's always bigger than whatever he's afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah. And Phil Vischer even said in the book that he kind of wrote that on an old guitar that he had learned guitar with as a kid, and But a lot of the music, the primary musician was actually, smartly enough, the music director at his church. And this, in a way, was kind of like a family friend affair. He had his co-creator Mike Naraki was an old friend from Bible college. He got Kurt Heinecke, or however you say it, the music director at his church, to kind of lead the production of the music and play the tuba for the theme song. And his wife, Lisa, provided, if not still provides, the voice for Junior, and I think another character or a couple or so. And so it was very much for him a family and friend affair.
Yeah, I have to look at IMDb to see if she's still voicing him, but that is a common thing you see in animations where a young boy is played by an adult woman. And that's usually because they are able to maintain a youthful sounding voice for longer. So I wouldn't be surprised if she's still doing it. Because technically speaking, VeggieTales is still active, but not as much as it once was. And I think that had to do with the transfer from studio to studio, and then Phil Vischer left because he wasn't given like creative control in any capacity, so he's like, okay, and then I'm out of here.
Yeah, so what eventually happened is the series kind of hit a hard place because in, like, I think it was 2004, a former distributor claimed in federal court that the studio behind the series, Big Idea Productions, had violated a partnership deal or partnership contract with them, which was technically false, but the jury was convinced it was true, and they gave the distributor everything they wanted, and Big Idea practically went broke, and VeggieTales intellectual property pretty much had to get auctioned off. And the series continued after that, but it seems like it's pretty much been less under Vischer's own creative control, and he's probably still at least writing a little bit and acting for it, but it's probably hasn't been the same since.
Yeah, as far as we can tell right now, it's kind of in a state of limbo. And you can definitely tell that Phil Vischer doesn't have much say in what happens now. Because I think in the last couple of years, there was a supposed announcement on what used to be called Twitter that either this year or next there would be a new Larry Boy movie. And he responded to that post saying, well, this is the first I've heard of that.
Yeah. Which reminds me of how One Television Network, because they used to actually, I won't name the network, they used to air VeggieTales cartoons on Saturday mornings, and they would, without Vischer's knowledge, remove like all the biblical and God references from it, which I think, if I remember correctly, I remember maybe not correctly or not, Vischer reading him saying, if I had known they were doing that, I would never have allowed them to air them.
Yeah, maybe their idea was that by removing those specific aspects, it would reach a wider audience, but I feel like it's more important to have a big impact on a smaller audience as opposed to a small impact on a large audience.
Yeah.
So if you're taking out one of the core elements of what this whole series is, then it's not going to come across as strong. At least I don't think. You've seen other large-scale productions centered around biblical stories like Prince of Egypt, where you don't have to have like a Christian faith to enjoy the story. while still mentioning God throughout.
Yeah, and even Vischer himself said in the book, God was the whole reason I started this thing in the first place. He was the whole point of it.
Yep.
And so, even when a company offering to distribute the series for like retail shelves offered to put it on shelves on the condition that those references be taken out, he said, "No, I'm not going to do that. It defeats the purpose for me."
Exactly. And it's not like VeggieTales would never be big enough to be put in theaters. In fact, at least 2 separate times that I can think of, they did have a theatrical release for something. One of them being Jonah in 2002. And I think that actually might have been the first movie I at least remember seeing in theaters. And then many years further down the line, the pirates who don't do anything that were in that movie, they had their own theatrical release. And I want to say there was at least 1 or 2 others, but basically, they can be in theaters, still have these important messages that directly reference God.
Yeah. There were those 2 films of Jonah, released in 2002. I do remember like eating up a lot of the extra material, and if this doesn't sell you on VeggieTales, I don't know. I'm not sure what will. But there was one particular feature, or a couple of them, that I particularly remember enjoying eating up. One was on the first disc, was a audio commentary track by the series creators Vischer and Naraki, but not as themselves, though they did do one regular one as themselves. They did one in character also, as the VeggieTales characters of Larry the Cucumber and Mr. Lunt.
Yep.
Characters that they voiced often. And they were acting like as if their world was real and that these characters were real people making a real film, real live-action film or whatever. And it was, from what I understand, very much made up on the spot, and they're just kind of rambling on. And there are all these references to like actors, famous names, and media that more grown-ups would probably be more familiar with. And they did this a few times in one extra on the second disc called Digital Dailies, which basically is a sort of technical goofs or unfinished animation reel with scripted character dialogue, voiceover going on in the background as if it's a real live-action world movie making process for them.
Yeah, I still quote the Digital Dailies every once in a while, because there are some bits in there that I've always found funny. Like, there was one particular goof that they had where Khalil was just sitting on a cheese curl that was floating in the middle of the air, and then they started singing a parody of A Whole New World from Aladdin, to which Khalil was just like, "You are making fun of me!"
Right. Yeah. And there's a bit of a George Lucas reference in that one too. It said, I think Larry says, I think we got that flying cheese curl from George Lucas, which, as you may know, the central creative force behind Star Wars.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, in those Digital Dailies, there was a huge amount of references and call-outs to other existing franchises, even if they had nothing to do with VeggieTales. Like, there was a reference to Narnia at one point. They mentioned people like David Copperfield, Kevin Bacon,
Tom Cruise, Dustin Hoffman.
Johnny Cash was mentioned at one point even.
Yeah.
There were just... Zorro was briefly called out at one point. There was just a large amount of them in there. I don't think I could name them all from memory. There were just so many. And that's one thing that VeggieTales often does throughout their series, which we'll get to in a moment. But one feature that I always appreciated, aside from the ones you already mentioned, that was also on the second disc, was their outtakes. Because contrary to popular belief, Pixar is not the only animated franchise to ever do bloopers for their animated projects. Even VeggieTales ended up doing it for this movie. And like Pixar did, they made their characters seem like actual people.
Yeah, A Bug's Life famously did this. That was like the first Pixar film to do this, and then Toy Story 2 and Monsters Incorporated did the same thing, and then it seemed to stop after that. Pixar might have been the first to do it, and I feel like Big Idea kind of, I guess, liked it and wanted to kind of more or less copy that.
It probably was the case because they all happened in a close time frame. Because there was at least 3 Pixar movies that did that. There was Bug's Life, there was Toy Story 2, and there was Monsters Inc. All came in the late 90s, early 2000s, which was also the case for Jonah. So it's entirely possible that they saw what Pixar was doing and thought, you know what, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think we should do the same thing. Now, granted, I think that was the only time VeggieTales did that, and I don't think Pixar did too many after Monsters. But, Pixar would still do something kind of similar, like when they did Cars, they would have car versions of previous films, all while poking fun at the fact that Ratzenberger was cast in pretty much all of them.
Yeah. What we haven't talked about yet, one thing we haven't talked about yet, is the general format of the VeggieTales video series, which probably is something we should probably get into a little bit.
Yeah.
So, the classic format, and they've deviated from this, probably for the most part since, if not permanently, is basically, Bob the tomato and Larry the cucumber are the main hosts of the series, breaking the fourth wall, introducing themselves, and then answering a viewer or kid letter asking a question related to the subject that's about to be tackled in the program ahead. And they would do, for the first few volumes anyway, 2 separate story segments with original or more or less original stories tackling this specific topic. In between, they would have an interstitial segment titled Silly Songs with Larry, basically a sort of goofy comedic original song performed by Larry the Cucumber. And then and then after the second segment, they'd come back to the framing device on the countertop setting and kind of review the big points, the big lesson conveyed by these stories, and kind of wrap it up with a scripture verse to kind of tie it all together, and then kind of sign off with God made you special and He loves you very much. Bye bye.
Yeah, very well-known quote. People still use it as a kind of a sign-out I've seen in a few places. And the fun fact about the Silly Songs with Larry thing, this is another thing that I read about. Apparently, that was only supposed to be a one-time thing, which is why after the first episode and the second one, which I believe is the one that had the Gilligan's Island parody, they had that whole advertising thing in the middle for a Forgive-O-Matic. But then, once they got a bunch of letters of complaint saying, hey, where's the Silly Song segment? We want it back. They decided, okay, I guess we're making this a regular thing.
Yeah, that is true. And the Forgive-O-Matic segment is basically to kind of... It's pretty much a parody of like Ron Popeil infomercials, and they even reference the name Ronco in it. And which I think is part of the appeal of the series, is it's not just, goofy, I mean, biblically inspired storytelling. It's also filled with a lot of pop culture references, and it's also spoofed a lot of pop culture. Like there's the superhero Larry Boy, which is pretty much a spoof of Batman, and there's a segment I make that very much not very subtly, if that's the right word, does a take on Star Trek. Even Scooter is pretty much, which another character like on the ship crew in that one is pretty much a copy of VeggieTales' answer to Scotty from the Starfleet crew in Star Trek. He's got like the thick accent, if you notice.
Oh yeah, and the references I feel like were more prominent in the beginning, but they would definitely stretch out to future projects. Like one of their last big projects that they made was called Beauty and the Beat. You can guess what that's a reference to.
Sure.
Yeah, Larry Boy definitely has quite a few non-subtle parallels to Batman. Like he's got the Larry Mobile instead of the Batmobile, the Larry Cave instead of the Batcave. He's got the signal in the sky, he's got the mansion, the butler. And for a while, he pretty much was solely a parody of Batman. But then, when they released their third Larry Boy story with the Bad Apple, there were definitely a lot of references and callbacks to Spider-Man, especially the Sam Raimi trilogy.
Sure.
Like he would swing around the city using his ears. There was a moment where he was hanging upside down. So, yeah, Batman's the main one. Spider-Man eventually wormed his way in there a little bit. He even says at one point, with great chocolate comes great responsibility.
Right.
So if people didn't know at that point for some reason, they probably figured it out by that line alone.
Okay. Yeah. Perhaps my personal favorite video in the series is Larry Boy and the Fib from Outer Space. It's basically Junior kind of tells a lie to kind of cover up his responsibility for breaking his dad's bowling collector plate, and keeps having to change the story when characters get wise or something, and eventually this alien who kind of plants the idea of lying in his head in the first place gradually gets bigger and bigger to the point where he's pretty much about as big as perhaps the tallest buildings in the city, and it becomes suddenly takes a pretty dark, suspenseful turn. It becomes like a parody of King Kong carrying Andero up the Empire State Building, pretty much, and the music is really good in that one. It's very, very good suspense, and it's a pretty fun one to watch.
You know, what's really funny about at least the first two Larry Boy stories, that one and the one with the rumor weed, is that even though it's called Larry Boy and the Fib from Outer Space or Larry Boy and the rumor weed, it more so focuses around Junior in a way. Because in both of those stories, Junior is the ultimate source of the problem that's going on at the time. Larry Boy's trying to stop it, but ultimately it's Junior and possibly a friend of his that ultimately put a final stop to the evil. Like the biggest problem in the first one was the Fib, who became a giant monster because of Junior, and then he was stopped because of Junior. Like even Alfred was like, Junior's the only one who can stop him. And then in the rumor weed, it was him and Laura that were spreading this big rumor, and of course that caused that rumor weed to grow bigger and bigger. And then once they started saying nice things about the person they were talking about, then the weed was defeated. So like Larry Boy was there, he was helping out, but it was more so in a way focused on Junior.
Yeah. Probably my other favorite is Madame Blueberry, which is kind of a pretty fairly, from what I understand, loose take on the French classic novel Madame Bovary, following a sort of a pretty fancy female blueberry, kind of looking like she has a pretty luxurious home, but is nonetheless dissatisfied and is always wanting more and more and more. And then she's introduced to this group of people who are from this pretty much a fictional Walmart that kind of has everything pretty much, I suppose, that she's been wanting, and she just goes crazy, and like enough is never enough for her, and without hopefully spoiling too much, I think it gets pretty pretty chaotic, and the ending is it's has a way of kind of hurting people in the feelings.
Yeah, very true. She, again, without going too much into spoilers, she lives in a literal treehouse. And she keeps thinking, I have all of this stuff that I've always wanted, but I can still get more. And it wasn't until after she saw somebody who had a lot less that she realized she could be content with what she already does have, which happens just in time, given a catastrophe that happens not too long after. But that is definitely a good one. If I had to pick my personal favorite, that's a little tough because there are a lot of good ones out there, but one that I do find myself coming back to at least semi-often is when they told the story of Esther. That one in particular didn't have too many obvious references or callbacks to pop culture, but there was just something about the way they told the story that I just find fascinating. And every once in a while, whether I'm on a long car trip or where I'm just sitting around working on something in my room, I'll have that playing in the background for whatever reason.
Yeah, and that's probably got some of the best music in VeggieTales, the Esther cartoon, and it's I think it's probably a big part of the reason why I appreciate, right, the music writing of it. It's a lot of it is very probably my favorite music in the series is in that one and in the Daniel and the Lion's Den segment, which was the second segment in the Where's God When I'm Scared volume, because it's got that sort of classic theatrical musical style that I think I like since I've grown up with it so much. And we were talking last show about its similarities to the Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat musical that we performed.
Yeah, and it actually, maybe it's just because of the story of Esther itself, but I enjoyed it so much that I started looking for other versions of that story being told. And one that I came to enjoy over time, once I found it, was a film from, I want to say 2006, something like that, called One Night with the King, which also tells the story of Esther, but it uses real people. And because it's got a theatrical length, they're able to go into more detail. Now, granted, like with many other biblical films, they take some liberties, but I still think they kept the core message in there, which I think is one of the most important aspects of it. So if people want to see the story of Esther, One Night with the King is a good one, but since we're talking about VeggieTales, their version is called Esther, the Girl Who Became Queen.
Yeah. And yeah. So yeah, I think there's a little bit of something in this series for a lot of people, whether you're a Christian or not. There's Phil Vischer says they had some Monty Python references. There's references to like Star Trek, Lord of the Rings. There's and some good silly little comedic gags like slushies getting dropped on people in the middle of a desert, which is just in itself silly, but I think it somehow works though.
And just the fact that they break the fourth wall in comedic ways too, because that's one of my favorite forms of humor, is when the fourth wall is broken. For those that don't know what breaking the fourth wall means, it's kind of when somebody acknowledges the medium that they're in or addresses various forms of logic or addresses the audience directly, like we were talking about earlier. And there was at least a couple in that one, like when they introduced this device that'll supposedly knock the wall down. You hear applause, and even one of the characters is like, "How are we clapping?" It's like it's acknowledged several times that they don't have hands, and yet somehow they're doing that. That's just one primary example. And then when they get to the end of the episode where they're about to sing the Whatever You Learn song, there's one more slushie that just drops from off screen somewhere because Bob wants to make the song stop, and they're like, "No, you stop right there. We love that song." Or when, I forget which episode it was. It might have been the first Larry Boy special or right before that, where Bob actually catches himself and whispers by going, "It's time to talk about what we learned today." Wait, why are you whispering? Because every time I say that, that song plays.
Yeah, that was the actual first appearance of the Larry Boy costume, so I think I naturally probably assumed it was just going to be a one throwaway thing and we'd never see that costume again, but of course it became a full-blown character after that, so. And I don't remember really there being like the clapping or the... Well, how are we clapping or the slushy dropping down on the countertop or whatever you said in the Joshua episode, but I don't know, maybe they remade it and added that in?
Maybe. I just remember seeing it myself. To be more specific, it's when Jimmy and Jerry introduce something they built that kind of looks like a giant missile.
Yeah.
And everyone's applauding in response to that reveal. And then the guy who sometimes plays Pa Grape's son, he's like, "How are we clapping?" To which Pa Grape goes, "I have no idea."
Yeah, and there's also I think we maybe talked about this last show, the segment that spoofs Gilligan's Island pretty much on the second video released of the series. Pretty much it's Bob and Larry running a tour boat, and they end up colliding with a big rock and getting stranded for what ends up only being about, because it's one segment, only being about 15 minutes versus the TV series it's based on, where they're like maybe multiple seasons stuck on the island. But it's basically Gilligan's Island.
Oh yeah, like Larry was wearing the same hat that Gilligan had. They mentioned that the tour was 3 hours, which is sung about in the Gilligan's Island theme song. And the guests on their boat were the same people in the theme song and in the show, like the professor, the millionaire and his wife. And they make a subtle reference to the original theme of Gilligan's Island when they're like, "Wasn't there that movie star and that other girl?" Because in the first iteration of the theme song for Gilligan, I believe, they mention some of the characters, and then they're like, and the rest here on Gilligan's Isle. So they kind of made a wink to that as well. Uh, Now, they don't stick to a direct story in one of Gilligan's Island's episodes, I don't think.
No.
But if you know the general plot and some of the characters from Gilligan, you can definitely catch the similarities here.
Yeah, in this version, they pretty much, they get stuck for maybe one day and then get out.
And they do so by the professor somehow building an operational helicopter out of bamboo and coconut. Nobody questions it, but, they're off on their way after hearing a Calypso-style song that we also talked about last week, considering there was a Calypso in our Joseph production. But yeah, there's so many callbacks and references, not just in that one, but a few others as well. And they, every once in a while, throw in a joke or two that make it seem like they're not just the actual people in these stories, they're actors. Like in one song, High Soul Cat, I believe it's called. Right near the end, one of the characters comes from off screen, and Larry just goes, "Wait, what's your name?" And the guy just goes, "They've never given me a name. I've been around since show 1, and I still don't have a name."
Yeah. Yeah, basically that's the VeggieTales parody of on Fornicilla or whatever that I think it's an Italian song or something that they parodied. So yeah, that may be one of very rare times that they used a pre-existing melody of music, from what I know.
Yeah, it was. And when I've seen multiple videos of people ranking the silly songs, that one is usually towards the bottom, with a big reason being because it wasn't an original melody, like it was a pre-existing one. But yeah, that was one of the few times where it wasn't an entirely original silly song. The lyrics were, and the setup was, but the actual tune that they used was, and still very much is, a popular one. Another example of that song being used for you gamers out there, there's a mission you can do in the GameCube version, and maybe the other versions too, of Spider-Man 2, the video game, where you deliver pizzas, and when you do, you also hear kind of a goofy version of that song.
Yeah. So it's kind of like what the Spider-Verse series did with Jingle Bells, the Spidey Bells thing. I remember that.
Yeah, and I mean, VeggieTales also had some Christmas specials in there, and I believe, I forget what the cassette name was, but there was a version of 12 Days of Christmas that they did with Polish food.
Right. Yes. It was a very veggie Christmas, I think it was called.
Something like that. And I don't even think they had 12 days of it either. I think it was closer to something like 8. And part of the reason for that is by the time they got that far, all the other characters are like, "Okay, I've already eaten too much, I'm done."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just, I guess that proves that the anticipation is often more fun than the thing itself.
It definitely can be, especially if you overindulge. And I think that Christmas special was also one of the only other times we at least hear the voice of that palm tree that also was featured in the Gilligan's Island parody.
Yeah, that may be right.
Let's see. Were there any VeggieTales specials that you're not as fond of, or did you generally at the very least like all of them, if not love them?
Um, I mean, there were maybe a couple of audio albums that felt maybe too extremely kiddie that I don't know. I never really got that much into. Maybe because I was older by the time I heard them, like the Easter album and the Worship album. I mean, they were not arguably not the worst things on the planet, but not the best either.
Yeah, I definitely get what you mean. There was at least one. I forget what it was, kind of a parody or reference to, but it involves Madame Blueberry's character with a talking mirror or something that I don't remember the full story, but I just remember not being as fond of it. Maybe I need to see it again and then I'll get something different out of it. But yeah, like you were saying, maybe it's just because I was getting older and I was starting to have different interests in different things. But for the most part, VeggieTales to me has had a great track record. Like another good one to me that I played all the time growing up was Sumo of the Opera, which had at least a couple references to other big media stories that were centered around fighting. Like there was some Rocky references in there. There was some Karate Kid stuff in there. Those are the two big ones at least. There might have been more. But I just love the way they told the story. I love the training montages that they had. The final fight, while I was bummed about the conclusion when I was younger, I definitely think it was done well as I grew up. But it's another one of my personal favorites.
Yeah, yeah. I think I saw that one maybe once. I can't say I recalled that much of it. There were some, I think, plenty of good ones like Rack, Shack, and Mini. Like several of them. I think that and maybe a couple others just had some really, really good, almost Broadway style mini musical vibes to them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good original music in that one, and also some good suspense and dark like cinematography in that one, within G rating confines, of course, but
Right.
yeah. So that one, strong one. The aforementioned Larry Boy and the Fit from Outer Space, and even the Bad Apple was pretty good.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed all three Larry Boy specials, and that's not even getting into the animated stuff that they did for him. And as we were mentioning earlier, at the end of each episode, they'll have a Bible verse that kind of sums up the lesson that they were trying to teach with the story they told. But they'll still either make references to verses or almost directly quote them when they're telling the story. Like with Rat Shack and Benny, after they were actually tossed into the furnace, there's a passage in the Bible where they're like, wait, didn't you toss 3 people in there? Well, there's 4 now, and one of them's glowing brightly. Now, they slightly reword it in the VeggieTales one, where Mr. Lunt's character is like, well, it looks like there are 4 in there now, and one of them's real shiny.
Yeah, that whole segment pretty much is an adaptation of that biblical story, specifically in the Book of Daniel, the 3 guys in the furnace. It's definitely does a good job of putting it on a fair enough kids comprehension level and making it into something, good, clean, safe, and fun for their age group. And it's very it's a well written, creative take on it.
And even when they did start the story, they let the audience know what their actual names were
Yeah.
in the Bible.
Yeah.
Like their actual names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But even the narrator was like, just to make it easier, we're calling them Rack, Shack, and Betty.
Yeah. And I believe if I remember correctly, even Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not the three real men's birth names, or I think because if you know the story, if you know the background, I feel like because they were foreigners living in a more ungodly, prevalently culture, uh, the Babylonian kingdom pretty much gave them replacement names. Not that really. It's not that it really, I don't think, matters that much, but I feel like I don't know, just I guess I just found that a little interesting.
It definitely, for sure, is. So, it probably was the case with their names being changed because of the area they were in. I think even Joseph received a different name while he was in Egypt. Like, he wasn't just called Joseph. Now, granted, I don't think that was referenced in the VeggieTales story, but there were at least a handful of times where a character, or not even a character, because these were real people, where they were brought in from a different country, and while they were serving under somebody, like Joseph was serving under Potiphar, I think he was addressed by a different name that they had given him. But maybe I'm just thinking of somebody else. But yeah, I'm pretty sure at the very least it did happen to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I want to say there was at least one other one. I just don't remember who it was. But what you're saying did at least seem accurate based on my personal memory and other research that I've done.
Yeah. So overall, I think VeggieTales has a lot of entertainment potential. There's a lot of creativity to it, and some good positive messages that aren't too bashed over the head, for the most part. And it's, if you're like not too familiar with it, it's at least, I think, worth a try.
Yeah, and even if they haven't made as much as they used to, even their early projects, even some of their very first ones, have a lot of staying power. And now that they're easily accessible on places like YouTube, you can still go back and watch them fully. You might have to occasionally look up the countertop scenes separately, but they're easy to find, even their original ones, right up to most of their recent stuff, or more recent stuff even. So if you have not seen a lot of their stuff and you're at least interested in how they tackle certain stories, go check them out. See what you think.
In the meantime, I think we'll wrap it up here till next time, and continue to stream us on YouTube and YouTube Music, and we'll be back again soon with another film franchise, another show perhaps to tackle in depth, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, and if you have seen a lot of VeggieTales before, tell us what your favorite one is, maybe what your least favorite is. If you have a favorite silly song, let us know that too. If there's a movie or show that you want us to talk about in the future, let us know. We always love the crowd interactions with our audience. And like he said, we hope to see you soon.
All right, until next time, see you.
So long, everyone.